The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and neither had the ache in Sarah's chest. She stood at the window of her cramped studio apartment, watching the streets of downtown Portland blur into watercolor streaks, and wondered when exactly she'd become invisible, not the kind of invisible that comes with age or circumstance, but the kind that settles into your bones when you realize that in a city of 600,000 people, not a single one would notice if you simply disappeared. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the view. Tomorrow was her 42nd birthday, and she would spend it exactly as she'd spent the last 3, alone, with a microwave dinner and the hum of her elderly neighbor's television, bleeding through the thin walls. Her phone hadn't rung in weeks, not counting the robocalls about her car's extended warranty. Her ex-husband had remarried. Her daughter was away at college, too busy building her own life to remember that her mother was quietly falling apart in a 5th floor, walk up with a broken heater, and dreams that had long since stopped making sense. But Sarah had learned something about invisibility in these past few years of solitude. When no one sees you, you start seeing everything else. She noticed things now. The elderly man on the 2nd floor who struggled with his groceries every Thursday. The teenage girl who sat on the building's front steps every afternoon, shoulders hunched, tears she thought no one could see streaming down her face. The young mother in 3B who juggled 2 jobs and a toddler, whose eyes carried the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. Sarah saw them all because she understood what it meant to move through the world unnoticed. And she'd made a quiet decision 6 months ago that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. She'd started with small things. Anonymous. A bag of groceries, left outside the old man's door. A note slipped under the teenager's backpack. Whatever you're going through, you're stronger than you think. You matter. $20 tucked into the young mother's mailbox with a simple message for coffee. You're doing an amazing job. No one knew it was her. That was the point. Sarah didn't want recognition or gratitude. She wanted to be the kindness she desperately needed when her own world had crumbled, when her marriage dissolved and her carefully constructed life revealed itself to be nothing more than smoke and mirrors. She wanted to be the hand that reached out in the darkness, even if no one ever knew whose hand it was. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Sarah took on extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a medical transcriptionist, not for herself but for them, for the others. She bought warm meals for the homeless man who slept in the doorway of the closed bookstore. She paid for a stranger's medication at the pharmacy when she overheard them saying they'd have to choose between pills and groceries. She left books on park benches with notes inside. This one saved me. Maybe it will help you too. Her apartment grew barer as her heart grew fuller. She sold the jewelry her ex-husband had given her, the designer purse she'd bought when she still believed. Material things could fill empty spaces. She kept only what she needed. Everything else became currency for small miracles in other people's lives. But kindness, Sarah discovered, has a way of echoing. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving when everything shifted. Sarah was leaving the hospital after a double shift, exhausted and dreading the holiday she'd spend alone with a frozen turkey dinner, when she heard shouting from the parking garage. A woman's voice, desperate and afraid. Sarah's first instinct was to keep walking. This was a city, and you learned quickly not to get involved. But something in that voice, some raw edge of terror, made her feet move before her mind could object. She found them on the 3rd level. A young woman, maybe 25, backed against a car by 2 men. One held her purse. The other blocked her escape. The woman's face was streaked with tears, her hands shaking as she pleaded with them. Please, that's my rent money. It's everything I have. Please. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, but before she could dial 911, the men ran. Not because of her, but because of the security guard rounding the corner. They vanished into the stairwell like smoke, taking the woman's purse with them. The woman collapsed against her car, sobbing. The security guard radioed for police, and Sarah found herself kneeling beside this stranger, her arm around her shoulders, murmuring the kinds of useless platitudes. People say when there's nothing else to offer, it's okay. You're safe now. It's going to be okay. But it wasn't okay. The woman, whose name was Maya, explained between sobs that the purse had contained $800, her rent money, scraped together from 3 part-time jobs. She was a nursing student, 2 semesters from graduating, living alone in the city after leaving an abusive relationship. The money was gone. Her landlord had already threatened eviction. She had nowhere to go and no one to call. Sarah listened, and in Maya's story, she saw reflections of her own pain, her own desperation, all the moments when she'd felt utterly alone in a world that kept spinning without noticing she was falling. She thought about her bare apartment, her own small life, the birthday tomorrow that no one would remember, and then she did something that surprised even herself. "Come with me," Sarah said quietly. She drove Maya to her bank, withdrew $800 from her own account, money she'd been saving, though she couldn't have said for what, and pressed it into the young woman's hands. Maya stared at the bills, then at Sarah, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I can't," Maya whispered. "I can't take this. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Sarah said. "I know you're trying. I know you're scared. I know you need help, and I can help, so I will. It's that simple. But how will I pay you back?" Sarah smiled, and it felt strange on her face, like a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. "You don't pay me back. When you're on your feet, when you're a nurse saving lives, you help someone else who needs it. That's how this works." Maya broke down then, crying in a way that was different from before. These weren't tears of fear or desperation. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of being seen. She hugged Sarah so tightly that Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time. They exchanged numbers, Maya insisted. She wanted to stay in touch, to find some way to thank this stranger who'd appeared like an angel in a parking garage. Sarah agreed, though she didn't expect to hear from her again. People said these things in moments of crisis, but life moved on and gratitude had a short memory. She was wrong. Maya called the next day to wish her happy birthday. Somehow in their conversation, Sarah had mentioned it. She called again the following week just to check in. They met for coffee, then dinner. Slowly, carefully, they built something Sarah hadn't had in years, a friendship. But the story doesn't end there, because Maya, it turned out, had been the teenage girl crying on the building steps 6 months ago. She'd lived in the building for 3 months before moving out. She'd been the one who found the note, the one who read those words in her darkest moment. She'd kept that scrap of paper in her wallet, carried it with her like a talisman. "You matter," it had said. And on the night she'd been planning to give up entirely, those words had been enough to make her stay. When Maya made the connection, when she realized that her rescuer in the parking garage and the mysterious neighbor who'd left that note were the same person, she wept. And then she did something extraordinary. She told her story on social media, not to embarrass Sarah or force her into the spotlight, but to illustrate a point, that small acts of kindness ripple in ways we can never predict, that the hand you reach out in the darkness might save someone you'll never meet, that being seen, truly seen, can be the difference between giving up and holding on. The post went viral, not in the shallow way of cat videos or celebrity gossip, but in the way that stories about genuine human goodness sometimes do, cutting through the noise to touch something deep and hungry in people's hearts. Strangers began sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness, of moments when a small gesture had changed everything. The comment section became a tapestry of connection, thousands of people realizing they weren't alone in their struggles or their desire to help. And then something else happened. People in Sarah's building started coming forward. The old man on the 2nd floor, the young mother in 3B, the homeless veteran who slept in the bookstore doorway. One by one, they pieced together the mystery of their anonymous benefactor. One by one, they showed up at Sarah's door, not with demands or expectations, but with gratitude, with love, with the kinds of gifts that matter. Home-cooked meals, help fixing her heater, an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner. They'd been seeing her all along, they said. They'd just been waiting for permission to say thank you. On Christmas Eve, Sarah found herself surrounded by people in the young mother's apartment, a potluck celebration, that spilled into the hallway. Maya was there, now working as a nursing assistant while finishing school. The old man brought his famous pecan pie. The teenager, now visibly happier, played guitar. The homeless veteran, now in transitional housing with a job interview lined up, told stories that made everyone laugh until they cried. Someone raised a glass and made a toast. To Sarah, who taught us that the opposite of invisible isn't famous, it's connected. But Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. The good kind. The kind that wash you clean. No, she said softly. To all of us. To every small kindness. To every moment we choose to see each other. Because that was the truth she'd learned in her year of intentional kindness. That giving and receiving are not separate acts but two sides of the same coin. That in helping others, she'd somehow helped herself. That in choosing to see people, she'd become visible again. Not because anyone was watching, but because she was finally fully alive. The rain had stopped weeks ago, but Sarah hadn't noticed. She'd been too busy living. Too busy loving. Too busy discovering that the opposite of loneliness isn't company. It's connection. It's knowing that your life touches other lives in ways both seen and unseen. It's understanding that kindness isn't a transaction or a sacrifice, but a multiplier that grows exponentially with every person who decides to pass it forward. Maya caught her eye across the crowded room and mouthed two words. Thank you. Sarah smiled and mouthed back, No, thank you. Because that was the final lesson, the one Sarah would carry with her for the rest of her life. That in saving Maya, she'd saved herself. That in giving everything away, she'd found everything she needed. That the title Her, the one people would use when they told this story in years to come, wasn't about Sarah at all. It was about every woman who'd ever felt invisible, who'd ever wondered if she mattered, who'd ever stood at a window watching the rain and decided that even if the world couldn't see her, she could still see the world. And seeing it, she could still change it. One small kindness at a time, one connection at a time, one moment of choosing love over indifference, generosity over self-protection, hope over despair. Her story, their story, our story. The story of what happens when we remember that we're not here to be seen, but to see. Not here to be helped, but to help. Not here to take up space, but to create it. Space for grace, for second chances, for the radical notion that every single person matters infinitely, whether anyone's watching or not. And in the end, someone always is.